Hello, everybody. And thanks for tuning in to 3 Inning Fan, the podcast, with me, Kelley Franco. I'm so happy to have you here. If you're still getting to know me, my company is called 3 Inning Fan, LLC, and please follow me on the socials at 3 Inning Fan. I'm an attorney by day, but I also have a baseball media business, and you are here in the heart of the podcast. Today, we're going to talk some Mets, some Yankees, 5 prospects to watch, the All-Star Game, and, of course, our favorite closer, what's good to eat while watching the ball game. My goal on this pod is to inform and entertain and to do it efficiently with minimal chit-chat. I'm not one of these people who's in love with stats, so you won't hear me wax poetic about WAR or exit velo. I just want you to be able to spend 25 or so minutes with me while you're driving to work or cooking or gardening or whatever, and feel like you walked away with a good understanding of what was happening in New York baseball and around the league. Now, one quick note before I get into the meat and potatoes. Your downloads, listens, likes, follows, subscribes are very meaningful to me. 3 Inning Fan is a startup business, and each time you support by following or subscribing or even sending a nice tweet, and again, only if you think I've earned it, but each time you do that, you're helping a small business. Thank you so much. Now let's get to some baseball. First, we're going to talk about the Mets. So the Mets split a 4-game series against the Pirates last weekend, and you kind of really wanted to see them do better, although they did have a nice win against the Nats last night. So that was good, and they're back at 500 now. But we need to talk about the Mets bullpen and what to do about it. Some are injured, and the ones that aren't injured are overtaxed. But we really had a bad situation in Monday's game against the Pirates when the bullpen absolutely imploded. Christian Scott was pitching a gem of a game. He had a 1-hitter going into the 6th. The Mets tied it up, and then the Mets and the Bucks were tied up at 2 in the bottom of the 6th. Christian Scott got the first 2 guys out, but he was removed from the game. He had 2 out and nobody on. Manager Carlos Mendoza took him out without giving him even a shot at getting the 3rd out. And Mendoza put in Eric Orsi, who was making his major league debut, and he gave up 3 runs without securing an out. And that is always so painful to me because that means he gets the old infinity as his ERA. Then Adrian Hauser came in and things really hit the fan. And the Pirates scored 5 runs in that inning, and the Mets wound up losing 8-2. So why did Mendoza take out Scott? He was on a pitch count, 75 pitches. Okay, we've all heard that by now. But he had only given up 1 hit, and it wasn't a difficult 75 pitches that he had thrown. He was dominating, and replacing him allowed the Pirates to win the game. And I've gone through this several times in my mind because I understand trying to protect a young pitcher. But I have to say, what it boils down to is this. If you're trying to win that game, if your sole focus is winning that game, Scott doesn't come out. Scott stays in. Mendoza said he was protecting Scott, and I respect that. And I do like Mendoza. Scott's a promising young rookie, and in fairness to Mendoza, also, we don't know if this is his rule or if it's a fiat from above him, maybe from Stearns. But here's the thing. We hear all this talk about protecting pitchers with pitch counts, yet we don't really see the evidence that it works. And so then we're left with this feeling that we're limiting pitch counts and the pitchers get hurt anyway, And so we may or may not be protecting this pitcher, and we lost the game anyway. Now, the old school guys, and I haven't pitched, so I go by the people who've played the game, and the old school guys who've played the game think that the problem is that these young pitchers aren't pitching enough, and that's why they're getting hurt. Could be something to that. But back to Scott, he's not even a flamethrower. It's, I think, clear from the research that these UCL injuries are being caused by the high velocities. And people I trust who have pitched and who know this game have said that it's the high velocities that are really causing these UCL injuries. And Scott's not even a flamethrower. I mean, would it really have killed us to leave him in for one more batter to see if he could have gotten that third out in that sixth inning? This isn't Johan Santana on 134 pitches to get a no-hitter here. We're just talking one more batter. And some people were saying, yeah, but the bullpen would have then imploded in the seventh. You don't know that. You put in Eric Orsi in a high-leverage situation. I know there was 2 outs and nobody on, so some people might think it wasn't a high-leverage situation, but it was. It was a tie game, and I think that was a tough spot to go make a major league debut. So, as Ron Darling said in the broadcast last night on this topic, these pitchers just aren't being trained to take the ball every 5 days for 6 months. And that is utterly and completely messed up. The Mets bullpen has been beaten down. You have to ask yourself, if they're not going to let the starters go deep, then the bullpen gets taxed further. And then the bullpen doesn't perform well because it's been taxed. And then it's a vicious downward spiral from there. How can they get out of it? Well, one thing they can do is have their starters go deeper, but that hasn't been happening. So let's take a look at the Mets bullpen. They have Drew Smith and Brooks Raley. They're out for the year. Sean Reed Foley is injured, and I don't know when he's coming back. It does not appear to be imminent. Edwin Diaz wasn't Edwin Diaz. And then he blew a bunch of saves, and then he got injured, and then he was suspended, and then he came back, and he's kind of been up and down. But one thing's clear at this point. We don't know if 2022 Edwin Diaz is ever coming back. Jake Diekman and Adam Ottavino are giving their fans agita, and not just the Italian Americans, all of the fans. Garrett and Nunez have performed pretty well. Although Garrett, I know he gave up a 2-run homer last night, but they've been pretty reliable. So why not get bullpen help now? Because they really need it. Why wait for the trade deadline? I wrote that yesterday. And then lo and behold, they got a reliever yesterday. Maybe they sensed that I had written that. They acquired 31-year-old right-hander Phil Maton from the Rays for cash, or the mysterious player to be named later. So Maton has a 4.5 ERA. They got him from the Rays. I should have said that. He has a 4.58 ERA in 40 games in 35.1 innings pitched. But I'm reading that he's pitched better recently. He had a bad start to the season, but in the past 11 appearances, he has a .75 ERA. He's spent 8 seasons in the majors, so he's been around San Diego, Cleveland, Houston, and Tampa Bay. And the Mets think they'll have him today or tomorrow in their pen. So, okay, I guess that was some progress. But Phil Maton doesn't exactly seem like Billy Wagner to me. And Mets fans may be feeling like, hey, Stephen A. Cohen is our owner, and we were in dire need of bullpen help, and we got, they check their notes, Phil Maton. Sometimes Mets fans feel like they don't get nice things. The Mets have battled their way back to 500, but they can't seem to keep their noses above it. Yes, they have the Nats the rest of this week, and the Nats are a pesky and good team. But if they can keep up what they did last night against the Nats this week, then they have the Rockies this weekend, and they should be able to make some hay against the Rockies. And so they could go into the All-Star break a chunk of games over 500, and wouldn't that feel good after how things looked last May? So what do they do at the trade deadline? First off, I hope they're buyers. And yesterday's trade for Maton at least shows a pulse for buying, but I'd like to see a more powerful arm acquisition for the bullpen. The Angels are reportedly listening to offers for closer Carlos Estevez, who's affordable. He's a rental. He's only owed the balance of a $6.75 million salary for this year, and he has good numbers. Mason Miller of the A's is the obvious belle of the ball, but he is going to have 1 million suitors, and the A's aren't even saying whether or not they'll move him. They're kind of hinting that they won't, but I'm not sure I believe it. Now, the Mets got Phil Maton from the Rays, but who I really wanted to see was Pete Fairbanks from the Rays. He'll be a hot ticket as the trade deadline approaches. I'm not sure the Mets are done trying to improve their bullpen after just acquiring Maton, but if they're not going to have their starters go deep, they need more help. And if they are in this race in 3 weeks at the trade deadline, they better be buyers. And if they're not in the race, one idea floating around is that they trade their starting pitching for valuable pieces. Take a look at their starting pitching, because when you sit down and add it up on paper, it's pretty sturdy. They have rentals for this year. Severino and Quintana are both rentals, and Manaea might be too. He has a player option, a $13 million player option he can decline if he wants to test free agency at the end of this season. Quintana is especially pitching well right now. So if they're in the wild card push, we're going to want Quintana on the mound. So this chatter about the starters is only if the Mets are out of it at the deadline. So if you sit down and add it up, the Mets have Quintana, Manaea, and Severino. And then they have Kodai Senga, who's throwing rehab starts now. And they'll certainly know what his deal is by the trade deadline. And then there's Christian Scott and Jose Butto. They also have Peterson and McGill. So if you were to get rid of one of Severino, Quintana, or Manaea, who would fetch a lot in this market, you would still have some excellent starters left, hoping Senga comes back as the Senga we know and love. It seems to me that the Met philosophy has been focus on 2025, even though they don't say that out loud. But they also kind of feel like, hey, if we happen to be good in 2024, that's good too. So if they're in a downward spiral in 3 weeks, you may see some of these starters move. But for now, things are looking up for the Mets. They're playing well, and if they want to move into one of these wild card spots, they need to do some more shopping. And by the way, before we move on, after all that talk about not having our rug in time last week, we got the rug, and it's here. But we're shooting in landscape, so you can't even see it. But know it's there, and know that we're very fancy. And Melissa, my amazing assistant, and my other helper, Duffy, cleaned up my wires, so it looks all nice and neat. Unfortunately, they did this by taping several wires to my back. I can't move. I am literally a prisoner of my own podcast. Let's talk about the Yankees. If I had a beer, I'd cry in it. But I don't have a beer because it's 11 o'clock in the morning and we have standards. Also, because I don't let anyone bring liquid near my new podcast equipment because I'm totally geeking out on it. The Yankees have lost 17 of their last 23. That is White Soxian. We are calling this portion of the program Rafael Devers is the new Big Papi. The Yankees had a terrible weekend. They lost 2 of 3 to the Red Sox at the stadium, and the losses were particularly painful. Friday night, they were winning into the 9th, and they were 1 strike away when Masataka Yoshida hit a game-tying 2-run home run off closer Clay Holmes, and then the Sox went on to win it 5-3 in 10 innings. That was hurtful. Saturday, it looked like the tide was turning when the Yankees won 14-4. And Ben Rice hit 3 homers in the game, got a curtain call, and overall made Yankee fans really giddy about their future. As a side note, Ben Rice also hit a 2-run home run last night, and we have to wonder if Anthony Rizzo is being Wally-pipped. But back to Saturday's game, because this is important. The Ben Rice euphoria masked a bad situation. Garrett Cole had another rough outing on Saturday. He pitched 4 1/3, gave up 4 earned runs on 7 hits, 2 walks, and 8 strikeouts. He gave up an RBI single and a homer to Rafael Devers. More on him later. In Cole's 4 appearances since he got off the IL, he's pitched 17 1/3 innings and has a 6.75 ERA. He's had really only 1 good game, if you want to call that, even though it was only 5 innings. That was the game against Toronto. Is it too early to be worried? No. It's been 4 starts. I'm concerned. Side note, Tim Hill pitched 2 2/3 innings in that Saturday game and got the win. That's good for him. Okay, the Sunday game against the Red Sox. Am I almost done with this? Because this is painful. Sunday was a punch in a gut. Luis Gil finally turned in a performance resonant of early season Luis Gil, who we knew and loved. He was able to use his fastball more effectively than he had in recent outings, and the Yankees gave him 0 run support. Hat tip to Cutter Crawford of the Red Sox, who pitched a great game. And if that weren't enough, Rafael Devers hit 2 more home runs, continuing to have his way at the stadium. So like I said, Devers is the new Papi. The Devers homers bother me. What I can't stand is just how good he is at the stadium. He has 28 career home runs against the Yankees, the most among active players, and he has 16 at the new stadium. And yes, I still call it new. And any music made after 2000 is also called new music. So his 16 home runs at the new stadium is the 3rd most in history, behind Jose Bautista, who had 19, and Edwin Encarnacion, who has 18. Devers' first homer was off Gil. His second one was off Tonkin, and a lot of fans got on Boone's case for letting Gil stay in to face Devers. That didn't bother me. Gil was pitching well. And the fact that Devers homered off Gil, then later homered off Tonkin, and the day before homered off Cole, shows me it doesn't really matter who is pitching to Devers. What bothers me is that any Yankee pitcher facing Devers in a close game is a bad thing. Just don't pitch to him in a close game. Until Yankee pitching figures out how to get him out, he gets first base. Yes, it stinks. Yes, we want to have faith in our pitchers. No, we don't want to act scared, but we also need to win. So experiment with getting Devers out when we have a healthy lead. And when it's close, pack him a lunch and send him up to first base. Get the next guy out. The Red Sox have a Yankee killer, but the Yankees don't have a Red Sox killer. The Yankees next face Boston at Fenway the weekend of July 27th, and the Sox return to the stadium in September. Right now, the Sox are only 3.5 games behind the Yankees, so who knows what the standings will look like when they face each other again the weekend of July 27th. The rivalry could really heat up, and of course, that is what makes baseball fun, but I do wish the Yankees were just playing a little better right now. And a further note about the Red Sox. A lot of people had written them off for this year. They had a quiet offseason. Their big signing was Lucas Giolito, who was later diagnosed with a UCL issue, had internal brace repair, and is missing the whole season. And then they traded Chris Sale. There were no blockbusters, and expectations were low. But they have been solid, and I bet they're buyers at the trade deadline. Watch out for the Sox, and it's not just the Yankees I'm talking to, it's the Orioles. The Sox are 6.5 games back of them. Last point on the Yankees. Cashman went to the game last night in Tampa. He doesn't travel with the team as a habit. I mean, he does sometimes, but he does not travel with the team every time they go. So it was notable. It was unusual. Was he there showing support for the team? I actually think he was, although some might suspect a more sinister motive. I think he's trying to get them to turn it around, and I think he didn't want them to feel like they were under the heat alone. And the Yankees lost again, so who knows? Maybe there'll be a team meeting in their future. All right, so it's time to get out of the New York bubble where we leave talking about New York baseball and talk about some few stories from around the league. But before we do that, I thought we could have a word from our sponsors. Melissa, do we have any sponsors? No. Oh, we don't have sponsors here. Okay, so what we're going to talk about are 5 prospects. So this is why I want to do this. If you're like me, you see these lists of like 100 prospects to watch, and you know that most of those prospects are being overhyped so they can be used as trade bait, or they are just not going to make it. You know, they may get a chance to make it to the show and then just flame out, or they may never make it there. And part of you is like, you know what? I'm a busy gal. I'm a busy man. I don't have time to read about 100 prospects when only 7 of them are going to make it. I just don't want to do that. So if you feel like you don't have the time to learn about all these prospects, this is what we're going to do. I have gone through some lists, and what I try to do for my listeners is take voluminous amounts of information and distill it down into small pieces so they can listen quickly and know what's going on. And if you ever watched my 3-inning minute videos, you know that that's what I tried to do with that too. And so this was actually the basis of the name of my company, 3-Inning Fan. 3-Inning Fan was this idea I had that you didn't have to immerse yourself in all the stats and all the history and all 9 innings of a game to call yourself a real baseball fan. You can be a casual fan and just watch 3 innings and still be a good fan. So that's why my company is called the 3-Inning Fan. So what I want to do is highlight these 5 prospects for you that I kind of combed through and found some for you to pay attention to. And I'm doing this for 2 reasons. The first reason is that this is kind of a first installment on trade deadline talks, because these prospects are going to be fodder for trade talks. You're going to get bombarded with talk of trade bait over the next few weeks, and this should give you a bit of a roadmap, because if your favorite team wants to land Mason Miller or Jesus Luzardo or Garrett Crochet, he's not coming cheap. The A's, the White Sox, the Marlins, they're going to be asking for valuable prospects to get these guys, so you're going to want to know their names. And then the second reason I wanted you to know some of these names is because the futures game is coming up. If you don't know, every year with the All-Star Game, the futures game is played. And now, even though the All-Star Game is a glorified scrimmage that features players wearing blasphemous American League and National League uniforms instead of their own, MLB does a good thing. They feature this futures game in conjunction with the All-Star Game that showcases the best prospects in the AL facing the best prospects in the NL. And the Futures game will be on July 13th at Globe Life Field in Arlington, where the All-Star game will be played on the 16th. So without further ado, let's talk about these 5 guys whose names you have to know. Number 1, Padres Ethan Salas, S-A-L-A-S. Some consider Salas to be the number 1 catching prospect in the game, although Orioles fans may take exception. We'll talk about their guy in a minute. Salas signed with the Padres last year and started playing in Single-A a few days shy of his 17th birthday. He's considered an exceptionally talented defensive catcher. His hitting has potential, with some saying he could be good for 25 home runs a year in the majors if he develops the way scouts hope he will. He will be in the Futures game, but for now, he's not trade bait. The Padres won't let him go for now. Our second of our 5 prospects, Orioles Samuel Basallo. There's your guy, O's fans. This is a name you need to know because he's a tremendous catching prospect. He'll be in the Futures game, and he could be trade bait. He's the number 2 prospect in the Orioles system, second only to Jackson Holliday, of course, and he's considered the number 2 catching prospect in baseball behind Salas. He's still 19 years old. He's a lefty hitter, and it seems to me that he has much more offensive potential than Salas, but he shows less promise defensively than Salas does. So why do I think we'll hear his name come up in trade discussions in a couple of weeks? Because the Orioles need a starter. They desperately need pitching. Garrett Crochet of the White Sox, perhaps. He's not coming cheap. Basallo is that good that he would be asked for in a trade for Garrett Crochet of the White Sox. The O's have star Adley Rutschman as their current catcher, so that frees up ownership to trade Basallo if they need to. Number 3, we're going to do a Yankee and a Met in here. Number 3 is Yankees Spencer Jones. You know Spencer Jones from spring training. He's a lefty outfielder. He's the Yankee number 2 prospect behind Jason Dominguez. He's a power-hitting 6'6", 235-pound infielder. My goodness, they don't make these guys little anymore, do they? He has power, but he does strike out a lot. He had a great spring training with the Yankees this year. He hit .444 in 13 games, and the fans were pretty hyped about him. He will play in the Futures game and so far has been untouchable in trade talks. The 4th of our 5 prospects we're looking at is our Met Brandon Sproat. He's a right-handed pitcher, and he's had an amazing season in Double-A Binghamton, and before that in High-A Brooklyn, where over 14 outings this season, he's had a 1.71 ERA. He's showing good promise at working deep into the game. Gee, that might be helpful. And his fastball has hit triple digits. He also has a slider and a changeup. He does have some control issues and is still inconsistent, so we're not seeing him anytime soon in Queens. Futures game, yes, he'll be there. Trade piece, possibly for the right guy, but I'm tempted to say no, unless it's really, really the right guy. And then our last of our 5 prospects that I wanted you to take a look at today plays for the Nationals, Dylan Cruz. Outfielder Dylan Cruz, he was taken in the 2023 draft by the Nats as the 2nd overall pick. Former LSU teammate Paul Skeens. He is a former teammate of Paul Skeens. He's looked at as an impact bat. He has plate discipline, and he drives fastballs in the zone. He's just fast enough to make you wonder if he'll steal a bag. And he has been in Double-A, but he was promoted in June to Triple-A. He'll play in the Futures game, but I expect he will be fiercely protected in trade talks. The Nationals have those beautiful sets of young prospects put together by Mike Rizzo. And I think that Dylan Cruz and the National James Wood, who just got promoted to the majors last week, are a likely duo who are going to shine in the Nationals' future. Their day's going to come, and it's going to be bright. All right, before we go, and before we get to our awesome closer, let's talk a little bit about the All-Star Game, because you know what I don't care about? The All-Star Game. That sounded very un-baseball loving of me, didn't it? But it's the truth. I spent a couple of years wishing the All-Star Game would be like it used to be, when players played hard and fans rooted hard and cared who won. When I was young, I grew up a Yankee fan. When I was young, the National League used to win every year, and it used to tear me apart. Now that I'm older and more wrinkly, I have come to one conclusion. The game is never going back. We have to get over it. Those days are over. Let's look at how it happened. But first, what is the iconic moment that demonstrates how hard the All-Star Game used to be played? Right now, you just said it in your head, unless you're some kind of weirdo who screams at your iPad. And I really think you might have just screamed it at your iPad, because we're all thinking the same thing. That iconic moment when Pete Rose barreled into Ray Fosse. If you're a more casual fan and you have no idea what I just talked about, the 1970 All-Star Game. It was tied at 4 in the bottom of the 12th. Pete Rose was on second base when Jim Hickman of the Cubs lined a hit to center field. And by the way, we would have known he was from the Cubs because he would have been wearing a Cubs uniform and not a dopey, blasphemous uniform that all National Leaguers would wear. But I digress. Rose barreled around third and toward home plate. And Ray Fosse, the AL catcher, blocked Rose's path, and Rose barreled into Fosse with such force that the glove and the ball went flying. Rose scored, and the National League won. They say Fosse was never the same player after that, which is not awesome, but they did play hard. Now, let me get this straight. Pete Rose is not my cup of tea, okay? I'm not a fan. But the point is, the All-Star Game was played hard. So if that was the high point of All-Star Game competitiveness, what was the low point? The tie game year. July 9th, 2002, the game was tied after 11 innings, and Bud Selig called it a tie. The managers had used up all their pitchers. I don't know about their itchers, but they used up all their pitchers, and maybe their belly itchers too. And why did they do that? Because they managed it like an exhibition game where everybody got the prize of playing, and then they ran out of players. So how did this go sideways with the All-Star Game? And can it change? Well, this is why it changed. Number one, interleague play. It used to be that the AL and the NL players never faced each other except in the All-Star Game and the World Series. So when they met up in the All-Star Game, it meant something. It was a battle of the leagues. And there used to be more of a rivalry between the leagues because the leagues were different. When I was growing up, the AL and the NL had differences. Each league had their own president. They had their own umpires. One of them the AL had the DH, obviously, and the NL didn't. They even had informally different strike zones. Yes, if there are any youngsters listening to this, the strike zone was the same in the rule book, but they were informally different because the NL umpires used an interior chest protector, and the way they crouched, it affected their line of vision. So their strikes were just a little bit lower than the AL strikes. It was crazy. So there were differences. And now we have two leagues that are totally homogenized. In fact, they're so homogenized, I don't even know why we have two leagues, although I do want to keep two leagues. But I think that, honestly, in 5 to 7 years, they're going to be gone. And what's the point of the All-Star Game if the leagues aren't even different? Second reason why it changed, the games are more accessible to fans. And this is not necessarily bad, but it's just a point as to why the All-Star Game has changed. When we were growing up, you got to see your local team play. And you also got to see the team that was playing your local team. The only other teams you saw play was a team that was playing on the Saturday game of the week or maybe Monday Night Baseball. And so when you heard of, this strange man called Mike Schmidt who played in Philadelphia, you didn't get to see him play. Or this guy, George Brett, who played in Kansas City, you didn't get to see him play. And then when you went to the All-Star game, when you watched the All-Star game on TV, you got to see him play. It was like this moment when you got to see all these mysterious players you had only heard about and read about. Now, if you're willing to subscribe to enough platforms and cable channels, you can basically see any player you want to see. And then the last reason why the All-Star game is different, the players are paid more. So some players today are paid tens of millions of dollars, okay? They're not going to risk their health in the All-Star game. Juan Soto's going to be worth $500,000 at the end of this year when he tests free agency. Do you think he's going to barrel into a catcher to try to win the All-Star game? No. And managers aren't going to take chances with someone else's player. So they're going to manage it like an exhibition game. Everybody gets an inning. How can we improve the All-Star game? We can't. Okay? It's not going back to the way it was. I'm done shaking my fist at the clouds over this. I'm over it. The kids like it, and they don't know how good it used to be, so that's fine. As long as the kids are happy and they also like the home run derby, let them all have fun, and I'll probably watch something else next week. I mean, I'll watch the game, but I won't die on the hill of watching the game. I'll probably go to bed when I'm tired. But you want to know a hill I will die on? For the love of God, let those players wear their own team's uniforms. I'm taking it to my grave. Coming up next week, I am going to be live at the Bigelow Senior Center in Fairfield, Connecticut, talking about baseball's greatest rivalries. That's Tuesday, July 16th at 11 a.m. if you're in the neighborhood. Then, of course, you have the All-Star Game, which I just slandered, the Home Run Derby, and a break that, frankly, just seems like it's a little too long for us real baseball lovers. Now, finally, the moment you've been waiting for, our closer, what's good to eat while watching the ball game. Today, for what's good to eat while watching the ball game, we have a guest contribution from one of my favorite followers on Twitter, Russ O'Brien. I should say X. I got to practice saying X. Russ O'Brien is one of my best friends on X. He's a huge Mets fan. And Russ says at Citi Field, he can't leave without having the New York-style hot pastrami on rye. He says it's a great value, which is always handy after you have paid approximately a mortgage payment to buy your ticket and pay for parking. But it's also delicious, and he says it's trimmed right in front of you, so we know it's nice and fresh. And if he's had too many of those lately, he may detour into the sweet sausage and pepper hero. Russ says, don't call it a hoagie on Long Island. You will be food shamed. I absolutely love sausage and peppers, and I'll have to make some and have Russ over. Thank you, Russ, for your contribution. Okay, and everybody else, thank you so much for joining me for the second installment of 3 Inning Fan, the podcast. Follow me along on the socials, and hopefully, if you think I've earned it, give me a nice rating or a follow or a subscribe. Thank you, and have a great day.